Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, 20 years ago, the Good Friday Agreement set up the power-sharing institutions, which it was hoped wouldn't just bring peace to Northern Ireland, but also bring people on both sides of the religious divide together. But an exclusive Sky Data poll has found that most people in Northern Ireland still only have friends of the same religion. And contrary to most assumptions, the young are just as divided as older people. Well, we can speak now to our Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, who is in Belfast at the Titanic Centre. David, 20 years on, there are those who are saying that the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, has passed its sell-by date.
Yes, I suppose 20 years is a lifetime in the reporting of politics of this place, but it was, you'll remember, Adam, a defining moment in the history of Northern Ireland. We spent 32 consecutive hours pacing up and down outside castle buildings. The midnight deadline came and went, and by the morning we were hearing that President Clinton had been on the telephone to the party leaders inside. And by tea time on April the 10th, 1998, you and I were witnessing really what was a defining moment in the recent history of this place. 19 unforgettable words spoken by Senator George Mitchell. I am pleased to announce that the two governments and the political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement, and it would be virtually impossible to exaggerate the significance of those words, given that 3,600 people had died during 30 years of violence. And despite the fact that there isn't a perfect peace and that some people are still questioning whether or not the agreement has served its purpose, a whole generation has now grown up without witnessing shootings and bombings on a daily basis.
Of course, that's a major gain, that there hasn't been violence on the streets. But at the same time, David, the idea was to bring the two communities in Northern Ireland, nationalists and unionists, Catholics and Protestants, more closely together. Has that happened?
No, it hasn't. An exclusive poll by Sky News has shown that there is still a religious divide. Astonishing, really, that some 58% of people aged 18 to 34 are telling us that they still really only socialise with people of the same religion. But there has been a big shift in terms of social issues. Now, 76% of the population supporting the introduction of same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland. But it's those social issues like gay marriage and abortion that continue to be overshadowed by the constitutional question of whether or not Northern Ireland should be part of the UK or part of a united Ireland. And many believe that's because of the system of government that was set up under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. We have been exploring all of those issues over the last couple of weeks, and today, on the eve of the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, the latest part of our Line 18 series comes from Belfast.
We've moved from the bomb and the bullet. The weapon of choice is now politics.
It is a divided city, but walls are in people's minds.
Some of the stuff that happens here in our two communities, it wouldn't happen in leafy suburbia.
It has risen from the ashes, most of it changed beyond recognition. On the banks of the Lagan, they went from building ships to building peace. But scratch the surface and you find something else. A city still divided by walls, 99 of them. Streets still segregated by bricks, mortar and religion. Our exclusive poll found that most people have few or no friends of a different religion. And despite assumptions, younger people are just as polarised as older people. In some parts, they lock the gates each evening between the Catholics and the Protestants. This is the story of Belfast, 20 years after the Good Friday Agreement.
They police the peace lines between the two communities in these armoured vehicles. The threat of attack here is still deemed severe. North and West Belfast are the most challenging, the most dangerous parts of this city, and that's where we're going on patrol with the Police Service of Northern Ireland.
There are different issues now. Drugs, mental illness and suicide. But some things never change.
That'll be Cannon Street, Tango 46 over.
Sergeant Craig McDowell has been a police officer for the best part of 30 years.
Every family probably in this area in North Belfast will have known somebody who's been involved in troubles, be it killed, injured, or been involved in killing or injuring somebody. Again, that's on both sides of the community. So that baggage will always be there. It can't go away. It'll never go away.
The hopes and dreams of a shared future are far from the modern reality. One side marches for a united Ireland. The other marches to remain in the United Kingdom. Pollsters from Sky Data asked a representative sample of the public here for their honest assessment. So how has life changed? 61% feel safer than they did 20 years ago. But 51% still say most or all of their friends are of the same religion, and 23% never expect power sharing to be restored. Julie Ann is a loyalist. A chance meeting set her on a path to the City Council. She says forcing enemies to share power deprived this place of genuine reconciliation.
We've moved from the bomb and the bullet. The weapon of choice is now politics. And politics, as you know, affects everyone's day and daily life. It affects their community, and it affects things such as the schools, obviously, and their health. And people feel that we're still very much at war.
Is sectarianism a generational thing? Will Northern Ireland eventually outlive it?
No. The legacy of our conflict has very much been our past. It is our present, and it will be our future until such times we address it.
Walls are in people's minds. If we don't try to break them down, we're never going to break the bricks and mortar down.
Jim was convicted of attempting to murder a policeman. A former IRA prisoner, he showed me Ballymurphy, a Republican heartland.
This is the police station here. You can see now, that's the front of it. And you have a Catholic community lives here. And you can see the length that this goes. And you can see the way that it's monitored. Why is all that money being spent on the security? Look, we're still going. We're still seeing the size of the security apparatus. But we have more people died from suicide.
Belfast hasn't had its Berlin Wall moment. Some people have lived in the shadow of these barricades for 50 years.
That's where Jean McConville was abducted.
But Tommy says there's more tension within each community now than between them. Turf wars between drug dealers.
Drug scenes getting out of hand, to be honest. Heroin, cocaine, you name it, they're all on the street.
You talk about people who prey on the vulnerable. Are you talking about former paramilitaries?
Mullen used to say the dogs in the street know what's going on in our areas. And we know what's going on in our areas. Criminality, there's no such thing as defending our communities. That's a lot of nonsense. They're destroying our communities. You know, the kids are dying and their families are cracking up because of what's happening in our street. I mean, some of the stuff that happens here in our two communities, it wouldn't happen in leafy suburbia, let me assure you.
And that's the real legacy of the Troubles. Drugs, mental illness and suicide. More people have taken their own lives since the agreement than were killed during the conflict here.
Well, there's a thing called transgenerational trauma, which is very prevalent, in my opinion, in today's society. You can't go through 30 years of conflict. And when I say conflict, I mean 30 years of war. There was a war on our streets. Belfast was a war zone, and the parts that would have been more so would have been the parts that, you know, are the socially deprived areas of Belfast.
Boxing rescued Dean from the margins. His sister was knocked down and killed by a stolen car. 3 of his brothers died by suicide. His fiancée also took her own life.
She was very confident and very bubbly and just So she was. You wouldn't have thought, like your average person in the street wouldn't have thought she was ill. She wouldn't have thought she had mental health problems. One of my younger brothers boxed with me as well. That's the one who took his own life. He used to box with me, and we used to do everything together. He's like, we weren't just brothers, we were best mates, so we were.
Dean's quite a resilient young man. He would have to be, given the issues that he's faced over the years. There's lots of other young people out there who are the same. We have to try and look at the real issues that young people are dealing with.
So there are other issues, but has sectarianism gone away? 51% feel it is less divided in Northern Ireland than it was 20 years ago. But 24% think it is more divided now. And Brexit's making that more pronounced. Half think it has deepened division. Maggie says she wants to move on, but can't. It's 47 years since her mother and aunt were shot dead by British soldiers in Belfast. You must have been really hopeful when the agreement was signed that Northern Ireland would leave all of that behind, that your children and grandchildren would grow up in a different environment.
That was definitely my hope. But in the meantime, I'm still back in 1971. I can't move forward. I need the truth. I need people to know that my mummy and my Aunt Dorothy were not terrorists and did not shoot out of the car and were killed in cold blood.
Do you think Brexit has added to the sense of division?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to start to fire up all these emotions. People are going to get frustrated, and I'm petrified of, for the want of a better word, the trouble starting again. I couldn't go through all that again. I don't think it's fair.
So there's another divider in play, but the tourists can't take pictures of an invisible Irish border. 91% of Catholics oppose border controls between Northern Ireland and the Republic, but 84% of Protestants oppose border controls in the Irish Sea. We've got a dispute about Brexit, we've got the breakdown of power sharing at Stormont, we've got a wall between two communities here. It all feels a bit broken, doesn't it?
It does, and it seems very pessimistic. But at the end of the day, I have to get up in the morning. I have to make sure I've got enough money to feed the kids, make sure my house is I've got my rent for my house or whatever, petrol in my car. I don't get that by worrying about the wall up and Brexit coming. I'm worried about where's my next loaf coming from. Well, a lot of people are like that.
Julie Ann breaks one stereotype.
Hey.
She's a loyalist in a same-sex civil partnership, a mother of 6-month-old twins. How difficult was it for you coming out in your community?
Coming out within my community, there was no, grand unveiling of the new Julie Ann or anything. People really didn't bat an eyelid at all. We have two political parties at the head of our government, one who is very staunchly unionist and wants to maintain and protect the union, and the other wants to destroy it. One wants to unite the island under one form of governance. And so whilst that exists, the social issues don't necessarily feature. Well, I think the entire community has its roots in religion, whether you're practicing or not. We're all stamped at birth. So we all have our religion from birth.
So are attitudes changing on some issues? 76% want same-sex marriage introduced in Northern Ireland. 54% support unrestricted access to abortion for women up to 12 weeks pregnant. And 69% believe all schools should be integrated.
Catholics and Protestants, we're just the same people, like. We've both grown up in the same type of situations and stuff, so the younger people are our next generation coming up, so they are, instead of, it doesn't matter, it really doesn't matter, we're all the same people, so we are, as I say, like, we are all the same.
Every morning they reopen the gates. People travel freely again from one side to the other. But until they're open permanently, the new dawn they were promised here cannot break.
We can only do so much, but we're only we're police officers. Although we are from the community, we're still human beings. I mean, our safety is the most important thing, hence we're still in our Land Rovers, still in our cars, still wearing flak jackets, we're still carrying a gun.
So they still have guns, but they don't have a power-sharing government. Belfast may have changed, but not to the point, where things are normal here.
This is no man's land, the space between Protestant homes on one side and Catholic homes on the other. It's the moderate voice of the middle ground that's been drowned out here, lost, some say, in a system of government that has kept the peace, but kept the walls too.
Well, David Bredden's there reporting from Line 18.
OK, we just want to take you live to Belfast, where ahead of the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, the UDA, UVF and Red Hand Commando are issuing a joint statement for the first time since the 1994 ceasefire. Let's have a listen in.
Important week. I would like to introduce from my immediate right Dr. William Mitchell, the Reverend Norman Hamilton, Mr. Jackie MacDonald, Archbishop Alan Harper, Mr. Jim Wilson and the Reverend Harold Good, and they will play an important part in the proceedings this morning. When the Loyalist Communities Council was initiated, there were three core aims established to help transform Loyalist communities. The first was the complete disengagement from criminal activity. Secondly, the addressing of severe educational disadvantage in Loyalist communities. And thirdly, the disenfranchisement that has occurred between Loyalist communities and the political process. Now, over the past few months, the three Loyalist organisations have been actively working and been actively assisted by key church leaders and academics and senior members of the community. This has resulted in the preparation of a declaration of transformation, which is going to be unveiled to you this morning, and I'm delighted to invite Archbishop Alan Harper to address you on this subject now. Archbishop.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, everyone. By way of explanation, I need to say to you that I'm part of a group of people engaging with leaders of the Red Hand Commando, the UDA and the UVF to support them in pursuit of positive transformation for loyalism and social, economic and cultural transformation for Loyalist communities. I'm accompanied at this event by the Reverend Harold Good, former President of the Methodist Church in Ireland, and the Right Reverend Norman Hamilton, former moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. I've been asked to deliver, on behalf of the leaderships, a joint statement timed to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and I've agreed to do so. No doubt some will ask, why are the three of you here today associating with members of illegal organisations? I will address that question. First, because for us this is a pastoral issue. It matters to us personally as parents and grandparents, and pastorally as churchmen, that we move heaven and earth to construct for our children and our children's children a society released from the chains of a violent and conflicted past. Second, because we cannot have a healthy, cohesive society if we do not ensure that groups left behind through conflict and division, scarred by deprivation, and disaffected by exclusion, are ignored and denigrated. Loyalist communities feel and find themselves in such a position. Loyalist paramilitaries are widely portrayed as part of the problem and that may be true. But by the same token, their commitment to transformation is essential if, as a society, we are to secure lasting stability. Rather than write them off, we prefer to invest in them time and trust, because transformation matters for everyone. And third, because thousands of innocent people remain victims of the conflict. Victims and survivors have a right to know that a significant group of those who were part of events that caused them immeasurable pain are filled with remorse and committed to a path that leads away from violence. Violence, for so long part of our past, does not belong and should find no place in any narrative of a shared future. Transformation will not be plain sailing. There may be setbacks. Perverse individuals may act or react in perverse ways. Nevertheless, today's statement establishes a clear direction of travel, and with my colleagues, I especially welcome the emphasis on respect for diversity. Furthermore, we anticipate that further initiatives will add substance to the aspirations made explicit in today's declaration. The goal of transformation should elicit wholehearted support from all sections of society. Maya Angelou, that shining light, wrote, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived. But if faced with courage, need not be lived again." For T.S. Eliot, last year's words belong to last year's language, and next year's words await another voice. And to make an end is to make a beginning. This joint statement foreshadows, we believe, a new beginning, a fresh start. And I shall read it now. The statement is headed, "A Loyalist Declaration of Transformation from the Red Hand Commando, the Ulster Defence Association, and the Ulster Volunteer Force." The Good Friday Agreement was created in a spirit of accommodation, and its promise was a more inclusive Northern Ireland. There would have been no agreement without the unique contribution of loyalists. However, it is time to recommit to the creation of a Northern Ireland that enables all to realise their potential and aspirations. Any community left behind in that ambition represents a failure, not only for the peace process, but for Northern Ireland as a whole. For too long, we have been berated for our past and not able to imagine a better future. We must challenge that outlook by no longer being apologists for conflict, but advocates for change, working to create a society that is at ease with itself in its diversity and difference. We made clear at the time of the CLMC 1994 ceasefire statement our abject and true remorse for the suffering we inflicted during the conflict. That remains the case today. However, no one should forever be excluded from playing a constructive role in the future because of past actions. We therefore seek to fulfill the commitments we made in 1994 by continuing a process of transformation. We draw attention to the fact that even in the context of Republican reliance on divisive identity politics, we continue to maintain a commitment to the peace process. We are fully committed to participation in such a process and will approach it with honesty, integrity and sensitivity. We also recognise the importance of a legacy process designed to help Northern Ireland confront the past.
OK, that was Archbishop Alan Harper giving a joint statement on behalf of the UDA, UVF and Red Hand Commando. It is the first joint statement since the 1994 ceasefire that brought to an end 30 years of sectarian conflict in Northern Ireland. Archbishop Harper saying that no one should be excluded from playing a role in the future of the country because of past actions.
Now, tomorrow marks 20 years since the Good Friday Agreement was signed. It was the political settlement that, for most, marked the end of Northern Ireland's troubles. Today, representatives of loyalist paramilitary organisations came together to announce that they would make the final move to respect law and order, and that members who continue to take part in crime would be expelled. Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davis is in Belfast now. Andy.
Well, it's 20 years on from that agreement, and I think what we got here today was a vivid reminder of how this peace process very much remains a work in progress. What happened today involved the three main loyalist paramilitary groups. Yes, they still exist. These are groups who in the past were associated with some of the worst atrocities of the Troubles, claiming to be defending the union with Britain against the IRA. Over 20 years ago, they declared a ceasefire. Today, alongside three former church leaders who helped negotiate this moment, they declared that they were renouncing criminality. In other words, anyone who is using their so-called paramilitary credentials to deal drugs, to extort or control communities would be turfed out. Here's an extract from that statement read out on behalf of the loyalist groups by a former Archbishop of Armagh.
We reject and repudiate as unacceptable and contrary to loyalist principles any criminal action claimed to have been undertaken in our name or attributed to any individual claiming membership of any of our organisations. We further declare that any engagement in criminal acts by any individual or individuals within our organisations will be regarded as placing those persons outside the memberships.
Now, you can look at this in two ways, I suppose. One, that if true to their word, then it represents significant progress on the part of loyalist groups in the wider peace process. Alternatively, you might think it's somewhat remarkable that 20 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, these paramilitary groups, however lawful they promise to be, are still there, still operating under the banners of old.
Yes, it'll surprise many people, but the Good Friday Agreement, Danny, it was a standout, a landmark deal because it strode both divides, it strode north and south and commanded overwhelming support from all communities. Presumably they're going to have something to say about that tomorrow in Belfast and beyond.
They certainly will. The former US President, Bill Clinton, will be in town, so too the former Prime Minister Tony Blair and his then Irish counterpart Bertie Ahern, among a host of other key players in that extraordinary period. And I think it'll be really interesting to see what tone they strike tomorrow, because Northern Ireland has been transformed over the last 20 years, but significant political challenges remain, not least of all the very vexed issue of Brexit and the border.
Andy Davis there at City Hall in Belfast. Well, I'm joined now from Belfast still by Professor Monica McWilliams, who was, of course, the founder of Northern Ireland's Women's Coalition, and by the leader of the Progressive Unionist Party and former paramilitary himself, Billy Hutchinson, both of whom were, of course, signatories of the Good Friday Agreement. Well, a very warm welcome to both of you. Billy Hutchinson, first of all, is this for real?
Sorry, I couldn't hear there.
Is this for real? Are these paramilitaries really going to abandon all criminal activities?
Well, I mean, I think for me, the significance of the statement is that the leadership are saying that anybody who does get involved in criminality, then they will, reject them and denounce them. And I think that, you know, we can't just leave this to paramilitary organisations. I think that the police need to be doing something about this. The police have been complaining for years about criminality, but they don't seem to be able to catch anybody. I think that, you know, from the Progressive Unionist Party's point of view, we would say that if people have any information about criminality, they need to give it to the police and allow the police to act on it.
But an absolute guarantee so far as these loyalist organisations, or at least the one that you might have some influence over, no more drug dealing, no more punishment beatings, that stuff all ends and it ends today, now.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, what I have to say to you here is that, you know, it's not as stark as what people think, but I do think, you know, criminality is criminality and it shouldn't come from anybody. But I do want to say that, you know, there's a number of organisations that are out there working. There's an organisation called Alternatives, which has prevented punishment beatings and works against that. And there are others who are actually working to transform paramilitaries. So all of that work goes on, but it goes on in isolation and it's not supported by government. And it hasn't been supported by the political process or those political parties.
OK, well, Monica McWilliams, I mean, Billy Hutchinson, not exactly saying it stops right here, right now, but certainly an optimistic slant on it. Do you believe this?
Well, as we used to say, building peace is a process and not an event, but how long does a process go on? I do think that statement today is positive. I think the gravitas of the three former church leaders lending themselves to that statement, putting their reputation on the line, shows that there is some integrity to this process. I do think that it's very important that they themselves shared that platform, the leaders of the paramilitaries formerly, to say that enough is enough, that the days are over when you can be an alleged commander and exercise coercive control over our communities. That's not what the Good Friday Agreement was about. And so we have to move on. OK,
20 years on, this may seem naive, but from some people this side of the water, as it were, surprised that things like paramilitary groups still exist on either side of the sectarian divide. Tell people over here why they're still there, insofar as you know.
Well, you know, division and hatred doesn't disappear because you signed an agreement and people still did not trust each other. And we've got circumstances constantly where they feel they had to stay in place. When I produced a panel with Lord Alderdice and John McBurney on recommendations for disbanding paramilitaries, it was quite a shock that we were asked to do so almost 20 years after the agreement, but it was much needed. They felt they needed to keep their structures in place on the loyalist side because they felt that there was still a threat over a united Ireland, that they might need to give evidence to the legacy of the past commissions if it was ever to be established. And they felt the corporate body needed to stay.
Right.
We did not believe that. There is no excuse for them to remain. And if they do, they are illegal. And they need to go out of the picture.
Right, no excuse for them to remain, Billy Hutchinson.
Well, I mean, you know, I think that Monica has sort of summed that up, but the reality is that the main political parties and the two governments have done nothing to actually relieve this problem. And I think that, you know, it is okay for people to talk, for people to go away, but a number of mechanisms need to be put in place. And
okay,
I think
but
that hasn't been done. You know, we have 20 years. We have 20 years of the agreement tomorrow. Pardon?
Well, tell me this: what is the point? What is the point of a law-abiding paramilitary? You've got a police force. I don't understand what a law-abiding paramilitary is. It's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah. Well, there's nobody talking about law-abiding paramilitaries. What we're saying is that the paramilitaries still exist and they haven't went away and they haven't been worked with to go away. And, you know, the thing about it is that all paramilitary organisations are still in place, no matter what anybody says. So it doesn't matter whether they're loyalist or Republican. What we need, and I think what Monica's talking about, is that we need them all to leave the stage. And that's exactly what we try to get to. But that hasn't been worked on. We haven't dealt with the legacy stuff. We haven't dealt with the past. We haven't dealt with parades, and we haven't dealt with flags. None of that's been dealt with. People have ignored that and buried their head in the sand.
Right.
You know, and that's why we don't have a government at the minute.
OK, well, let's look forward in the time that remains. Monica McWilliams and then you, Billy Hutchinson, too. Give us a health check. You guys, you were both there. I was standing outside looking in. You were at the actual thaws. You were doing this stuff. So I guess, I mean, congratulations, both of you. But 20 years on, Monica, give us a health check. What sort of state is this landmark agreement really in now?
Well, I remember you standing outside, and I remember, I think, telling you that I hoped in 20 years' time my life would be totally different from the 30 years that had gone before. And that has been the case. We have put safety in place, we've put security. It's not a perfect piece, as you've heard from Billy and I, nor is it, as you've just heard in an earlier piece, in London either, where you have got gang attacks. But we will continue to work at this. Let's have some positivity here. People have realised they have to be interdependent on each other. We are now much more comfortable with our identities, being British, Irish or both. And we do believe that there are still unfinished pieces, like letting our children go to school, like sharing our housing, so that we can live alongside each other and amongst each other in a way that we didn't do when I was growing up. So let's celebrate tomorrow, let's mark it. But I have to tell you, I am working as hard today as I did 20 years ago to make this agreement work.
Right. Are you, Billy Hutchinson, still as hard as it was 20 years ago? I mean, there's balance of optimism with some pretty harsh reality coming through here.
Yeah. Well, I think Monica summed it up, you know, and I like to be a half glass full rather than empty. But the reality about this is that we are where we are and we need to work at it. And I think, you know, tomorrow will remind us of what we tried to do 20 years ago. It hasn't got worse, but I do think that there's a lot of issues we need to deal with. We need an assembly in Northern Ireland. We need local people actually running the country, and that's what we need to get back to. But unfortunately, it has collapsed again, and we need to make sure that it doesn't collapse ever again. So we need to look at how we actually do that. For me, I think that tomorrow will bring a lot of reminders about what was achieved, and I think that we can achieve more, but we need to work together to achieve that.
OK, well, I guess the patient is shaky but stable. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us.
Tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. It was two agreements, in fact. One was between most of the parties within Northern Ireland and one was between the UK and Irish governments. Between them, they included a new constitution, effectively, for the North, a new cooperative relationship between the Republic and the UK, and an historic recognition by everyone that only with the consent of the people of Northern Ireland could there be a united Ireland. But the content barely seemed to matter as much as the change in mood. A generation of us had, for our entire conscious lifetime, never been able to associate Northern Ireland with anything except anger, argument and violence. And then 20 years ago, there seemed to be peace. It didn't resolve everything. Anger, argument and occasional violence remained. Moreover, the DUP weren't there 20 years ago. Only after a second deal, the St Andrews Agreement, did the DUP get on board. And of course, the system has to some extent broken down now. But still, a lot did change. Well, one man who was at the heart of the process was the Taoiseach Bertie Ahern. He was there before, during and after the deal, and I met him earlier today in Dublin to talk about events then and now, and I asked him to cast his mind back 20 years to how he felt at the moment the deal was done.
Well, I think we were all relieved because it had been one hell of a week. Nobody had got too much sleep over the preceding 4 or 5 days. And it really was the end of negotiations that started in September of 97 and run right up to 98, because we were at it, you know, more or less 3 or 4 days a week.
Had you ever doubted that it would happen?
Oh, I did. I mean, the weeks up to it, there were a lot of difficulties. I mean, the issues were enormous. It's good for people to reflect back now what the issues is. It's a different generation of leaders and people, but the big issues of the time were the constitutional position. There was the issue of decommissioning of arms, the prisoners issue, the reform of policing, which was a total change of the old Royal Ulster Constabulary, and then the huge legislative base, which was around the criminal justice, the equality legislation. You know, there were big ticket issues.
A sad side story, your mother died in the days before.
Yeah, my mother took a heart attack on the Sunday morning, just as I was involved in the talks, and she died on the Monday. So the removal was the Tuesday and she was buried on the Wednesday. So I was literally going from, you know, Dublin to Belfast for the talks. And there all the time, and then just back for the funerals in between.
Holding your head together at all at a time like that?
Yeah, well, like a lot of these things, when you think back at them, you wonder how you did that. But I think, you know, I was conscious because you've been involved in the process for months and you realise that there's a deadline. you realise everyone was working to that deadline, and you know, I just had to work with it too. So it was just, you had to get on with it, and that was it.
I'm interested in your view of the DUP. They obviously became, a few years later, they became the dominant party on the unionist side in Northern Ireland, and they weren't there. Did you think of them as an irrelevance, or did you think, what was your view of the DUP?
No, I was sorry that they weren't there. They had played a constructive enough engagement in the talks in 91, 92. Those talks broke up without really getting anywhere, but it's still, you know, there were talks. Then they were involved in the talks in 97 and 98, but they had pulled out at that stage as well. I would have preferred them in, because we always said that what we were trying to achieve was a comprehensive, inclusive process. Of course, they opposed the Good Friday Agreement. They were on the no side of the vote in May of 98, but they were usually on the no side of everything in those years and those days.
There was a moment in 2004 when everyone wants the DUP to come in. They'd become the biggest party on the unionist side in Northern Ireland. You met with Ian Paisley and prayed with Ian Paisley in the Irish Embassy in London. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that was our first formal meeting. We had great difficulty in deciding where the meeting would be. Finally, as a compromise, he suggested the Irish Embassy. He had his prayers. I joined in with his prayers. So,
it's a very strange way for diplomacy to be conducted, I think.
Yeah, it was just the two of us at the breakfast table, and we had a very good breakfast and a very constructive discussion. At the end, he said, I'll go, I said, we'll have a press conference. I wanted to have a joint press conference. He didn't, so he said, I'll go out first, but he said, I'll do another good sign of goodwill. I'll stand in front of the Irish flag, and I'll make it look as if it's a mistake, which he did.
He said that?
He did, and then he went out, and the huge assembled media, he said he had breakfast with me, and he said he had a hard-boiled egg, a very hard-boiled egg, because he said he knew if there were hard-boiled eggs, I couldn't have poisoned them. So I afterwards said he never took the orange.
In a funny sort of way, we're celebrating marking the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. It wasn't really until the St Andrews Agreement that actually, frankly, most people don't remember, that the DUP came on board. And you then had Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley in this triumvirate running Northern Ireland. Isn't that really the moment when something really big has happened? These people you could never conceive of having worked together.
I think that was the great. I think there are two bits on this. Maybe there's three. There's still one to play out. But the first bit was the Good Friday Agreement. The huge success of the Good Friday Agreement was that it ended the political violence, except for a few incidents by dissidents, which were very serious, like the Omagh bombing, which was immediately after the agreement. But that ended the violence. It wasn't till 2007 that we really got the political institutions to work fully, and they worked very well until the last 15 months. I think the last part is to get that sustainability going forward, which I think will happen, but it's still the bit to play out. I think we well named the whole thing as the peace process, because by its very meaning, process goes on.
It's a journey.
So we're still on that journey.
I mean, Brexit's obviously going to complicate this whole task enormously, because you can't conceive of there being a physical border of any kind.
No.
And do you think the United Kingdom can tolerate any kind of border down its middle between GB and Northern?
Well, I think Theresa May has said that no British Prime Minister can ever do that. There never, let's be honest about it, there never will be a border. There's not going to be a physical border across Ireland, because if you tried to put it there, you wouldn't have to wait for terrorism to take it down. The people just would physically pull it down, the ordinary people.
It's possible that the British will come up with a good scenario that doesn't require much of a physical border, just a teeny weeny little bit of infrastructure near the border. Is that going to work? Is that going to be acceptable?
I think we've had 20 years plus now of just absolute free movement.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think the British government, the solution, Brexit is a disaster for Ireland. I mean, it's no good. I just wish it didn't happen, but I accept that it did. But the only resolution is that the customs union, if it's fairly close
for the whole of the UK, not just for special status for Northern Ireland.
For everybody. You know, I'm not with the special status for Northern Ireland because I don't. There's a whole lot of problems about it work. But if the customs union, whatever the trade, let's say customs union equals trade agreement, if that trade agreement is fairly close with what's presently there, I think, forget about Ireland for a minute, I think that would be good for the UK's economy.
Here's the thing, the choice that might face Ireland in the next 12 months. Ireland has to either accept some British proposal with a teeny weeny bit of infrastructure near the border, or Ireland has to say, no, we're holding out for Britain in the customs union and with quite close alignment on rules. And we want the EU to back us on that. And if the EU backs us on that, we're willing to say no transition, no nothing. Britain, you have the most horrendous of all Brexits unless you give us that. That may happen. Ireland will have to choose to play hardball with the EU on its side. Now, would you recommend Ireland takes that approach?
Yeah, I think that's I mean, hopefully that is not the scenario, but it is. I accept your analysis that could happen, and I'm afraid the answer to that is we have to play hardball.
Of course, one of the things the Good Friday Agreement said was that if the majority population in Northern Ireland chose to be part of a united Ireland, then that would be what happens. The Northern Irish decide. Do you think Brexit has made that more likely?
It depends what the fallout of Brexit is. But my own take on it is to have a border poll, and even though I was the one who put it into the Good Friday Agreement, to have it in circumstances where there's not sustainability and there's not workability of the whole institution would be the wrong time to do it. The only time a border poll is worth having when a sizable number, whatever it is, it'll never be huge, but a sizable number of unionists and loyalists believe that they can join and share with Republicans and nationalists in a new Ireland.
So it's not a kind of 52-48 in the polls for 3 weeks. No. Let's have a border poll. Just one last question. Good Friday Agreement 1998. Do you think anything could have stopped that happening in 1988 or 1978? I mean, what actually changed in the 20 years beforehand, apart from a lot of people needlessly dying, to make it possible in 98?
It is a risk for sovereign governments to deal with people who are engaged in violence, and you can't do it without them signing up to peaceful means and moving towards peaceful means, which isn't easy, particularly when paramilitary organisations are not disciplined as much as they should or could be. But that was the difference. The reason it went on so long was that we didn't bring in those who were actually involved and causing, some of them causing the violence by physical violence, some of them causing it by what they were saying. So I think that was the difference in 98.
Bertie Ahern, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the anniversary tomorrow of the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement.